This is life on Earth as we know it today. But as we go about our daily business, big changes are afoot. Thanks in large part to human activities, our climate is changing faster than ever before. The planet is heating up. Ice caps are melting. Oceans are rising up to swallow the land. Begging the question, is time running out for our coastlines? Conservation scientists are trying to turn the tide. They're returning to nature, to the mighty mangrove, as a way to cope with rising sea levels. But before mangroves can save us, we must save their vanishing forests. How is simple science stepping in to revive Indian mangroves? And how can mangroves help us overcome the ravages of climate change? These are questions of science. We're staring at a waterlogged future. Over the last century, the average global sea level has risen by 10 to 20 centimeters. This may not seem like very much, but it's enough to seriously threaten our coastlines with extinction. The situation is even graver when you consider how fast this rise in sea level has been. It's been twice as rapid in the last 20 years as compared to the previous 80 years. What does this mean? It means that India's vast coastline, spanning 7,500 kilometers, is at risk. If this happens, livelihoods and habitats supported by this coast will struggle to survive, and entire coastal ecosystems might disappear completely. Ecosystems like the mangroves.
The coast gives livelihood for a third of our population. This is why the coastal ecosystem, particularly the mangrove ecosystem, is extremely important. The mangroves serve multiple purposes. One is, of course, they act as speed breakers during tsunami or when you have storms and so on. Secondly, they provide fodder to animals. Thirdly, they promote sustainable fisheries because the mangrove plant releases a lot of nutrients in the seawater. And you will find wherever there are mangroves, there is a large amount of fish, in other words, sustainable fisheries.
India hosts nearly 7% of the world's mangroves, occupying over 4,400 square kilometers and 8% of the coastline. This unique ecosystem acts simultaneously as a fortress and a bridge between freshwater and seawater life. For this reason, mangroves have a cherished place in the hearts of coastal people. From time immemorial, they have been revered as protectors of the community, with ancient customs and traditional ways of life growing symbiotically with them. These ancient mangroves also have relevance for the future. Since they are sustained by rain and tidal waters, they are a repository of organic life that could help coastal areas withstand the effects of climate change. Unfortunately, as late as the 1990s, little was known scientifically about this richly biodiverse ecosystem. That's when one of India's greatest scientific minds led the charge to learn more. Professor M.S. Swaminathan, one of the architects of the Green Revolution, had a dream to catalogue the biodiversity of mangrove ecosystems in India. His vision was given life by the Chennai-based M.S. Swaminathan Research Foundation, or MSSRF. Their aim was to conduct a detailed genetic survey of Indian mangroves. Of special interest were a class of plants called halophytes. Halophytes have the extraordinary ability to survive in saline waters, or waters with high salt content. They have great significance for the future of coastal agriculture, where key crops may need to be grown in farmlands submerged by highly saline seawater.
Mahatma Gandhi said, nature provides for everyone's need, not for everybody's greed. That's very true. If you look at plants, you have xerophytes, you have halophytes, you have all different ecosystem. There are plants adapted there. But halophytes, which are salt tolerant, have not received the same attention as the other kinds of plants. So we are trying to collect them before they disappear.
In the mid-90s, the genetic survey of Indian mangroves began with MSSRF scientists panning out across various parts of the country. They started out in their immediate backyard, the mangroves of coastal Tamil Nadu. But what they encountered was a shocking devastation. Denuded and barren troughs lay where rich mangroves once grew. The waters had evaporated, leaving the soil muddy and extremely saline, so saline that it could no longer support mangroves. MSSRF scientists' most urgent question was, what had caused this widespread destruction? Initially, it was believed that as human habitation increased, local communities exploited the forests, threatening their existence. But on deeper study, scientists learned that this destruction had a long history that was rooted in the concept of clear felling. Clear felling describes the complete clearing of a forest area once it reaches maturity. Indian mangroves had been a victim of clear felling since the 1930s.
See, previously, large trees were present here. They were all felled by the, before British period and even after the British period, they were all clear felled because of a system of management that existed in the past.
The deserted wetlands formed a trough that became a trap for sea waters that flowed in high tides. The water remained in the bowl-like troughs, making the soil increasingly saline, eliminating any possibility for mangroves to regrow. With the death of mangrove trees like Rhizophora and Avicennia, surrounding organisms also began to die. In a domino effect, fish, shrimp and prawns dwindled drastically, and livelihoods of local fish farmers suffered losses. What could scientists do to reverse the tide? A host of innovative solutions was suggested, including importing soil from other areas to grow mangrove farms. But the answer wouldn't just come purely from a high-tech research institute.
If you neglect the local community's knowledge, you are denying yourself thousands of years of experience. So you have traditional wisdom, the ecological prudence of the local community, and their own coping mechanisms, coping capacity, and then marry modern science and traditional wisdom, what we call eco-technologies.
The eco-technology proposed to revive Tamil Nadu's mangroves was a combination of local wisdom and academic expertise. Joining hands with the Tamil Nadu State Forest Department, MSSRF launched an intensive and often challenging program to restore mangroves. They focused on key forest areas like Pichavaram and Muthupet.
We are in a place called Muthupet Mangroves where a traditional fishing method is followed for the last 300 years.
This traditional method involves building a series of canals that lead into the forest from the sea. These canals are fitted with different types of fences to trap fish and prawns and provide livelihood for local fisher folk. But conservationists from MSSRF were interested in another inadvertent fallout from this ancient system. The fishing canals created ideal soil conditions for mangrove species of plants to grow successfully.
The simple idea we got is that if you have some kind of canals to avoid the stagnation, as well as to facilitate the water, tidal water is coming in and going out during the high tide and low tide, which happens every 6 hours in a day. Then we thought that the soil salinity will go down and the soil moisture will improve. Then if you plant the tree, it will come. That is the genesis of our restoration technique.
The idea was to dig a series of canals leading from the shore. The canals would be in the shape of a fishbone. Along the banks of these canals would be raised mounds of soil where mangrove trees could be planted. Canals prevent the stagnation of saline water by allowing the free ebb and flow of sea water. When the tide is high, saline water rushes in to help trees grow. When the tide is low, the saline water is flushed out. This doesn't just provide the perfect ground for mangroves to grow, it also has another benefit, one that directly impacts the lives of the local community. The canals are 3 to 4 feet deep with a steady flush of tidal waters and a nutrient-rich environment thanks to the mangrove forests. This makes it a perfect breeding ground for small fish, prawns and shrimp.
It's called integrated mangrove fishery farming system, wherein we are integrating the cultivation of mangroves with the culture of fishes and prawn to provide some kind of income for the local community so that they will sustain their mangrove growth as well as their livelihood.
It took nearly 2 decades and a unique partnership of locals, scientists and forest officials. But today, there are resplendent mangroves across Tamil Nadu, for example, at Pichavaram and Muthupet. It's almost impossible to imagine how barren this land once was.
Actually, this is the site where we demonstrated our first model of mangrove restoration. So, when we started the work in this area, there was no grass at all. It was totally the area was degraded and the soil was encrusted with the salt. So, you can see now the growth of the mangroves. Not only the growth of mangroves, some of the plants which naturally they colonized this area. So, which clearly indicates that this area has become now natural forest and supports natural growth of mangroves.
The mangroves are once again in full bloom and the canals are full of life. For the local fishing community too, this intervention has brought rich dividends.
அதிகமாக இருக்குது. காடு வெட்டி வாய்க்கால் வெட்டி காடு வச்சு கன்று வச்சு அது வளர்ந்து அது தழை ஊந்து அந்த எருவுக்கோசரம் இறால் வளருது. மீன் வளருது, நண்டு வளருது, எறா வளருது, வெள்ளை இறாவது இல்லை, கதுன்றால் தான் முக்கியமாக வளருது.
In recent years, the restored mangroves have also stood up to natural disasters that have hit coastal India. Whether the 1999 super cyclone or the terrifying tsunami of 2004. In all cases, mangrove forests and canals absorb the energy of lashing winds and gushing tidal waves, drastically cutting down the loss of life and property in surrounding villages. Today, these mangroves are performing the most important job of all, helping scientists at the MSSRF conduct genetic surveys of its biodiversity. Just as MS Swaminathan has envisioned, these anticipatory studies can help us cope with climate change and rising sea levels in the coming years.
This ecosystem, the bacterial population, especially the microbe population, very few people are working in this area. When our foundation started to work in the mangrove ecosystem, we have started to work in the microbial diversity from this ecosystem, especially from the Pichavaram ecosystem.
Hidden within the soils of these mangroves and invisible to the naked eye are countless microbes that are unique to this ecosystem. Many of them have never been observed or catalogued before.
This is a special, unique ecosystem we can't find in anywhere. If I collect a sample from this site, with 5 meters later that site, their population diversity will be more.
microorganisms extracted from mangrove soils are taken to the lab. Here they are genetically analyzed using DNA sequencing and fingerprinting techniques. Many samples find a match in existing microbial catalogues, and many other microbes are discovered for the very first time. In such cases, their unique characteristics are studied in detail. Some mangrove microorganisms have been found to have remarkable properties like anti-cancer, anti-diabetes, and anti-inflammatory properties. But the true quest for coastal conservationists is the microorganism species called halophytes.
These microorganisms isolated from the mangroves are tolerant to high salinity levels, and these microorganisms can be applied to enhance plant growth promotion or agriculture productivity in the coastal agri-ecosystems.
The hunt for halophytes and the isolation of their DNA finds fruition here, in the labs and greenhouses of MSSRF. Here, scientists study the special genes that make mangroves uniquely able to survive environmental stresses.
We are the first group in worldwide to have started work on the genetic gene isolation of the mangroves. And this has given us a very, rich repository of material.
Scientists have found genes that don't just withstand stresses like high salinity, but also stresses like heavy metals, etc. They have even isolated genes that can help plants survive drought-like conditions. The question is, when sea levels rise, how will these genes help coastal farmers? The answer lies in transferring the resilient mangrove genes into commercial crops like rice through biotechnology.
Once you have isolated the gene and identified the genes, then we use the molecular tools to transfer the genes from the mangroves to rice plant. That is what we have demonstrated already. And once it is done with the one particular variety of rice plant, then we can take a conventional approach of breeding to different other crop varieties.
In MSSRF's tissue culture lab, mediator plants are being used as models to study the expression of genes extracted from mangroves. They are infected with these special genes and allowed to grow.
So you infect it with agrobacterium which has got your gene, and then the gene gets integrated because the agrobacterium is a natural engineer.
These bioengineered plants are called transgenic, as they contain the special gene extracted from a different species. Along with these transgenic varieties, scientists also grow control plants, or plants that have not been infected with the special gene. Now, both the transgenic and the control plants are subjected to the same stresses, like high salinity.
The control will wilt in 5 days. You will see the leaves shriveling up and yellowing. But the transgenic, which has your gene, is able to thrive.
Once successful in the mediator plant, the gene is transferred to a crop of commercial interest, like rice, which is a common staple across large parts of India. These transgenic rice varieties potentially have the ability to grow in even those coastal farmlands where rising sea levels have increased the soil salinity. This means coastal agriculture can now prepare itself for the effects of climate change.
By introducing modern technology, whether it is biotechnology, genetic engineering, by which we have produced from mangroves, the genes have been transferred, or information technology, combined with the traditional wisdom of the local community, then you have a wonderful coping capacity against sea level rise.
And so, the future of India's coastlines depends heavily on the restoration of mangroves. MSSRF's research and the Forest Department's cooperation, coupled with the ancient wisdom of those who live off the land, has given us a 21st century solution to save the mangroves. It's also inspiring others to replicate it.
There are demands from other countries. They have seen all these things. They wanted to see whether it is possible to replicate this technology in their countries.
But conservationists can't rest just yet. For the true triumph of this eco-technology will only be when every mangrove in distress has been rescued.
Their large area remains degraded in many of other mangroves. For example, in Muthupet in Tamil Nadu itself, we have to restore another 10,000 hectares. Likewise, everywhere the degraded mangroves are still there. And so this technology is going to be there for a long period of time to restore those areas.
If you'd like to share your feedback on today's program, please send your suggestions and comments to Vigyan Prasar, C24 Qutub Institutional Area, New Delhi 110016, or you can mail us at info@vigyanprasar.gov.in.